Hello my friends, thank you for joining me in this tutorial. I will be making a ring stand with craft resin, my favorite of course, especially for this type of project because there's so many nooks and crannies for bubbles to get in, like these precious flowers hold all kinds of space for bubbles. I didn't end up using these as it turns out. I will also be using this beautiful string of pearls. I am ecstatic with how this turned out ultimately. Those pearls were just something I saw that I thought, that'll be pretty, and they turned out amazing. And that's me, Magically Resin. And this is my box of craft resin mica powder. I just love their colors. They're so vibrant, and you'll see in this video that just a tiny bit went such a long way. I said to use a small amount, and I actually wish I'd used less because it was so powerful. But it was beautiful. I really like when I'm using any of these type of molds to put them, if they fit inside of a small cup, to use the cup for stability. It turns out that the mold that I'm using didn't fit in a cup or I would have used it, but for the smaller ones it makes so much difference because the last thing you want to do is knock it over and get resin everywhere, because I am all about A, not wasting resin, B, most importantly, not getting it all over the place to clean it up. So this is my technique where I use the syringe because I'm only just filling up the tip of the mold and I want a tiny bit of resin in the bottom. So I have a tutorial on my YouTube that I will link to in the comments for how I do this. These are filled with craft resin, and it is such a easy way to measure out a tiny bit of resin without any spillage, without any hassle. I just absolutely love this way. I do cup turning as well, and so very often I mix up a very small amount of resin, and I use these cups. They're little bathroom paper cups, and I use them over and over and over again so I don't have to clean up a cup. I mean, there's so many reasons that I do this, but if you're curious about it, you can watch that video and I will go into further detail as to why I do it. And you'll find I've been doing this for 6 years or so, and you'll find that I am all about making it easy, making low maintenance, low cleanup, but also making it completely safe and making sure that I'm protected and just making it so little cleanup, but still making it really effective. So I'm doing my mix. I really like these cups because they're flat all the way around, so there's nowhere that the resin isn't going to get mixed. So I'm mixing in. I'm being careful not to incorporate too many bubbles, and what I'm going to do is I let this sit for 5 minutes to make sure all the bubbles were out. You could let it sit a little bit longer depending on the temperature of your room and the thickness of the resin, because you don't want to have it flash cure in the glass. So that's all about becoming acclimated with your resin, and also reading all the instructions, reading all the suggestions by the manufacturer for time frame. And I had sprayed the mold with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol before I did this to make sure that it went all the way down and there weren't any bubbles that got trapped against the silicone. It's not a function of the resin or anything, it's just a function of any resin and silicone can trap bubbles. Much less chance of that with the low viscosity craft resin, which is a huge part of why I love it so much. So I'm filling the tip, and I want a really crisp, crystalline look on the point where the ring would be. I really like that look, and I'm going to add some crystal rocks here in a minute, but I want to make sure that they're not going to fall all the way down into the tip, because I really want that to be a clear, pristine look after I demold it. I really particularly like molds like this that have sides that you can scrape your mixer on. I keep this green mold that is over to the side. It has flowers in it right now, but I keep that available for me to put any extra resin in, to put my stick in, so that it's a geode mold, a crystal mold, and it just fills up with different colors, and it makes the most beautiful crystals whenever I demold it. I'm using my cordless heat gun on a very low setting. I particularly like this one because it doesn't push out a lot of air, so it pops the bubbles, but it doesn't move things around. And now I'm adding 1 or 2 drops of pearl mixative. What I'm looking for in this is I want the crystalline look, but I want it to have just a bit of shimmer of, when you look at it, you see completely through it and it's clear, but you think, wow, there's something like sparkly inside of that, but you can't quite make it out. I really like how fine the mixative, if you just add just a few drops. Now what I'm doing, I didn't want to mix it in. I want striations through the resin. So I want it just ever so slightly. I don't want it to sit on top. I want it to move around. And I also don't necessarily want it to sink all the way to the point. Again, because I want to keep the point really pristine and clear. So I really like these mixatives when you just want to add a look that you can't quite put your finger on. Glitter is gorgeous, but is way too noticeable, and this is really hard. You can't really tell it's in there, and I like that. So now I'm just waiting for this to cure because I want to move on to the next step, but I really want this to be the consistency of a thick honey, because I don't want my crystals to sink too low. Sorry about moving this out of focus. I needed to be able to see into it. What I'm doing is I'm pushing the alcohol ink just ever so slightly into the resin, again, so that it doesn't go to the bottom, but that it disperses a little bit more, so that it's just like a pixie hint of something happening inside of there. This has been curing for about an hour in a room that is about 80 or 85 degrees, so a little warmer than average room temperature. And it is nice and thick honey consistency. So you can see when I put the crystals in that how they drop is really ideal. So I also wanted to make sure that because it's so thick now and it's not the thin consistency that it normally would be, I want to make sure there's no bubbles in there. And I found that something weird got in there next to the silicone. I don't know what it was, but I'm picking it out with my very favorite tool, a metal nail file. It's soft enough on the end that it doesn't scratch silicone. You need to be careful with it, but it is a really good tool. It's really easy to clean up, and I've had this file for years. I've used it on, I don't know, probably hundreds of pours. And I bunched up all of my pearl string, and I wanted like it to be circular but kind of open on the inside, because when I put it in, I want to be able to put crystals in the center, and I want the pearls to be closer to the edge. So I spend quite a bit of time poking it down to get it shaped the way that I want it to, and also you know, making sure that enough of it gets in the resin that it doesn't pop up in a weird way. It kind of acted like wire might, so it wasn't super easy to get it to stick where I wanted it to. But ultimately, it turned out amazing, and I got it in just the shape that I wanted, and then I added the crystals into the center, and they pushed it out to the wall, and I'm so happy with how this turned out. So I decided to make this piece after I watched a free course at craftresin.com. And I have links everywhere in my link tree and everything for these courses. But I took this course on dried flowers, and while I have been doing resin for a long time, I haven't done a whole lot with dried flowers. So I was really glad for this course, and I felt really empowered to try something new. And boy, am I glad that I did, because this turned out to be one of my favorite pieces ever. I just adore how this turned out. And I probably will put some up in my Etsy, but I'm definitely keeping this one for myself. It didn't turn out perfect, and I think it was a great example of how it isn't, you know, you have a vision and then sometimes it doesn't work out the way you think it did. But I actually love that it didn't turn out perfect. And I really like the reminder that lots of things in life aren't really what you expect they're going to be, and they don't turn out perfect, but you kind of have to look at it a different way and think, okay, maybe it wasn't exactly what I expected, but the outcome was so beautiful and the universe really provided for me. So I'm incredibly grateful for that reminder, and that's why I'm keeping the piece. Okay, so I used mica pearl powder from Craft Resin, just a tiny bit, but even still, I wish I'd used even a tiny bit less. And that's basically where I, said that it didn't turn out the way I expected. I made it a little bit more opaque than I had planned on, which made the pearls a little bit harder to see, but it also was really cool. So, it's a toss-up. This is me doing that same thing that I do with the syringe mixing technique or syringe measuring technique. And I'm mixing up the last batch to pour over the pearls and to embed my dried flowers in. So if you have not worked with dried flowers a lot, then the first thing that's really important to know is that they are very porous. There is a ton of spaces for bubbles to get trapped with dried flowers. So it is incredibly important to make sure that when you put dried flowers in and you put resin in on top of them, that you just cover them, but you leave yourself enough room to maneuver your mold, and you'll see me doing this in a little bit, so that you can kind of squish the flowers to make them release the air that's inside of them so that the resin can get in there. It has nothing to do with the resin, it has everything to do with the flowers. Wood is porous like this too, so there's techniques that you need to use when using porous things inside your resin. I just added 1 drop of mixative rose gold. A little bit goes a really long way. That also might be why it turned a little more opaque than I meant. And then the ever so slight amount of the pearl. God, this pearl mica is just so pretty, y'all. Seriously, it mixes beautifully and it is so gorgeous in everything. And just adding the tiniest bit gives this gorgeous shimmer. I absolutely love this product. All their mica powders are beautiful, and you get like 30 different colors in the box. It's incredible. But see here, like I barely used any, and I mean, it's just so gorgeous added to really everything. But ideally in this case, I wanted the resin to be a bit more thin, translucent. And I really thought it would be by the way that it looked in the glass, but sometimes it's hard to tell, and even after doing it all this time, because it looks rather translucent there. So anyway, still learning. We're all still learning. I let that sit for 5 minutes to make sure it had degassed well, and I definitely did not want any bubbles at this portion where I'm pouring it in on about half of the pearls, but I'm also going to be putting the flowers directly into this after I let it get a little sticky, because I actually want it to I want the flowers to sit in a very particular way. I'm really particular about my plan and how I execute it. So using resin at different states of cure is an amazing way to add versatility to your crafting, because resin, as it really thickens up, can hold things stationary that are, especially something light like flowers. It can really hold it just exactly where you want it if you do it when the resin is at the right space to be soft enough to put something in, and also not too cured so that you don't embed bubbles. Because if the resin is too cured and you push something into it, you can push something into it, but what you will also be doing is pushing in air bubbles, which is not great. So playing with resin and finding the sweet spot for your particular brand, which is also why I like craft resin, because they give you so much time on the cure that it gives a lot of opportunity for correction and for bending. I do a lot of bending with bowls and stuff like that. And craft resin's fantastic for giving you a larger window to work in if you're doing something where you actually play with the shape of the resin, or if you embed things in the resin. I decided at this point that it would really benefit structurally and visually from having some more of those quartz crystals, because they're just so gorgeous. And these are unturned, so that's why they're not shiny or anything, which is fine. If you're putting any stone, really anything, into resin that has a flat or dull surface, the resin will shine it up as soon as you put it into the resin. So there's no need to have shined stones or anything of that nature, because it won't matter when you put them in resin. So I get them, in bulk like this, and they're cheaper. And I really like how that filled out the structure, and it also pushed up the resin. So you're not using as much resin. It was kind of hard to know how much resin this mold was going to take, because I knew that the crystals would fill up a fair portion of it. And I'm doing all of this with the resin barely being cured, just a few minutes. I have not waited for this round of resin to cure at all. There are 2 other rounds of resin underneath it, or maybe 1. I don't know. I can't remember now. Y'all will know if you watch the video. But this round of resin that I'm pushing these crystals into, or actually just letting them sink, is brand new. So it's really soft and the crystals are sinking right in, which is ideal because I don't want to trap bubbles, and there's really no advantage right this moment to waiting to put the crystals in. There is, however, a huge advantage to waiting to put the flowers in, because I want to use the resin in an adhesive fashion where it'll hold the flowers exactly where I put them for the most part. It is extremely important to check the sides of the silicone and make sure that you don't have any trapped bubbles. It doesn't matter how good your resin is, it doesn't matter what you're putting in it. Silicone holds bubbles right next to it for pretty much anything you put in it. So it's always really important to check the sides, especially if you're doing like I'm doing and you're adding and adding and adding. So what I'm doing is I'm adding enough that I don't think it will go over the resin. I want all of the rocks to be embedded in this pearl layer. I don't want any of them to show into where I'm going to put the flowers, because I don't want it to distract from the visual of the flowers. So this resin now has cured for a couple hours. It is pretty goopy and perfect for holding the flowers right out to the side, which is exactly what I want it to do. So this part turned out textbook, even though I have barely worked with flowers at all. I was really happy with this part. And I'm pushing the green of the flowers down into the pearl, because I want you to really see the purple flower, but I'm not super jazzed about the stem part of it. I mean, it's pretty, but the purple's where it's at. So I'm pushing the flowers down, and I'm making a border where there'll be a little bit, I plan on using a clear resin with this, there'll be a little bit of where you can see through, because the flowers aren't going to meet each other completely, but it'll be mostly purple around the edge. And I'm using tweezers for this because they're just perfect for this job. And I just wipe them off at the end with a paper towel, and then I also clean them with hand sanitizer, which is pretty much what I do with everything. The tutorial that I was talking about on craft resin is super helpful for getting the basics on how to work with flowers and getting some ideas of maybe how to incorporate them, because they really add such a lovely element to your pieces. And I am so happy that craft resin put this together, because I made this piece that I adore, and I really just hadn't thought to work with flowers very much, but they had such an earthy, beautiful, wholesome element, and I really loved it in conjunction with the pearls. It felt super girly, and if you know me, I'm not super girly, so this was really fun. To the crystals being very earthy and the pearls being very girly, this was just such a lovely, soft, feminine piece, and I was really happy to be reminded to push out of my normal comfort zone and try something different. They also have a bunch of other courses. I took one the other day about how to use resin with wood, and I learned a ton from that one. So check it out if you are looking for inspiration, if you're feeling like everything you're doing kind of feels the same. I know quite a bit about resin, and I was still amazed at A, how much I learned, and B, how many ideas that I had not considered before, and it really just made it feel so easy. So I'm just about to finish up placing in the circle around the outside and then just pushing in the last two. I have no idea how I managed to have exactly the right amount of flowers in the right size. That was just chance. I didn't measure anything, but it really did turn out to fit exactly what I needed it to do. Probably muscle memory from doing this for all of these years. I don't know, but it did. It fit just so perfectly. So you'll see in a little bit, after I add in the next layer of resin, I really make sure and push it into the purple flowers to release any air from them. That really is a key takeaway from if you're working with flowers, and especially if they're not flat pressed flowers like these were not. There's just endless spaces for air bubbles to hide, and nothing ruins a project faster than that. So I really was incredibly careful to make sure that all of these pieces were close enough to the silicone, and so that there weren't bubbles between them and the silicone, and that I really pushed into them to make sure and release any bubbles that were stuck inside of them, so that they wouldn't then release an hour after I walked away from it. And now this beautiful thing is all ready to just sit and cure up a little bit more, and then I'm going to add in the last layer. This is the last layer, and it is the same technique that I've been using, mixing up resin with the syringe and then giving it 5 minutes or 10 minutes to sit, depending on what consistency I'm looking for from the resin. And I was looking for a very thin viscosity from the resin for this, because I want to make sure that it gets in all of the nooks and crannies. So I mixed up the resin, I'm pouring it over the flowers, and I'm only pouring it to just the top of the flowers. I want to give myself a ton of room above, inside the mold, so that I can squish things around without the resin squishing out over the mold. So you can't really tell because of the angle, but there's still quite a bit of room inside the mold for the resin to get squished up without it overflowing. And I think this is a good technique with any type of porous business that you're doing. If you're putting something in a mold that's really porous. This is 90% isopropyl alcohol. I like that for popping bubbles for something like this especially. It also, I think that I sprayed the flowers with it before I put the resin on, so that it would have that same, effect and that I did when I put it down in the cone before the first pour. And now we just squidgy widgy, a term made very popular by a person that I watch on YouTube named Steve McDonald. He has made a ton of great videos. You should definitely check him out. But I find myself thinking all the time as I'm doing resin and I'm squishing out bubbles or anything like that, his squidgy widgy terminology just cracks me up. So squish, squish, squish. Softly, because I don't want to dislodge the flowers. The pearl resin mixture has been curing for probably 3 hours, so it is really thick underneath this newest pour where the flowers are stuck in. But still, I don't want to take a chance of doing something weird, so everything's really delicate at this point. And I still have my heat gun on very low heat. It's incredibly important that you do not use a heat gun or a torch that's too hot when doing anything with resin in a silicone mold, because you can fuse them together and you will ruin your mold, which is just awful. You'll probably ruin your project too, but it'll certainly take a chunk out of your mold. So always be very careful when using any type of heat with a silicone mold. So just squishing, looking for bubbles. From my angle, it was really important to keep moving it around so that I could see every angle. And I think if you can do that, it's really important. I probably will put a Lazy Susan in here. Being able to turn stuff and look at it from every angle, especially if you're doming stuff, is really important. So while I have a moment, I'm going to talk a little bit about safety. It is extremely important that you make sure that your skin is covered and that you have a respirator on and that you're in a well-ventilated area. Craft resin is one of the best resins for safety, but it's still incredibly important that you make sure and wear your respirator and have a ventilated area, especially also if you're doing isopropyl alcohol spray. That should not be breathed either, for reference. So being sure to have all your safety gear happening is vital in every instance of anything that you're going to do with resin. Make sure that you're safety first, because your health is worth more than everything. So I got all the bubbles out and I felt really good about it, and I went ahead and poured the rest of the resin in. And then I do like I always do, I turn my cup upside down in my gorgeous crystal mold that has my stick sitting in it right now. And I got this mold from Julie Art on, well, she's everywhere. She makes amazing molds. But I'm friends with her on Instagram. So she just sells amazing stuff. She has her own website, but you can find her at JulieArt7, I think. I'll link it below. But she makes the most beautiful molds for crystals. And for my particular use, this mold is the best catch-all for extra resin so that none of it goes to waste. And I really like that. And it's really easy cleanup. So the cup just sits right in, and all the extra resin just goes out. It doesn't matter what color it is because it's a crystal, so it all turns out beautiful. And it has a really nice lip for my mixing stick to sit on once I get it all cleaned off. So I really, I find so many ways to do these things that make them so user-friendly and so little cleanup. Again, my heat gun is on low. And this baby is full and almost ready to put a cover on to make sure nothing gets in it and make sure no bugs or anything. Spraying one last time with alcohol, very sparingly, by the way. You do not want to go crazy with that. Just a little bit goes a long way. And look at that! How pretty is that? I forgot how gorgeous this was just when I poured it. It turned out just spectacular. The demold on this was so pretty. I wish I had recorded it. Thank you all so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. I'm having so much fun sharing all these insights with you. And please be sure and subscribe and follow me on Instagram.